His wife texted, "Going on a vacation with my ex, don't be jealous." What he did next shattered her life. Those were the exact words Clara Morgan sent to her husband before boarding a plane with another man. Convinced her husband would spend the next 2 weeks sulking and missing her, she had no idea that the man cooking noodles for their son at home had already begun a countdown to her downfall. What unfolded next proves that some people don't scream, don't cry, don't beg, they calculate. Viewers, imagine getting this text from the person you trusted the most. How would you react? Drop your thoughts in the comments while you listen to this story, because this one is going to shake you. The rain hammered against the windows of Ethan Morgan's 2-story home, a house he had worked years to afford before his marriage. His 6-year-old son Oliver sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging as he slurped up noodles, giggling each time Ethan twirled them dramatically with a fork before placing them in his bowl. It was their routine. Simple, warm, father and son dinners. When Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter, the name Clara lit up the screen. His wife of 8 years, the woman who once promised forever, the mother of his child. Ethan's hand froze halfway to his mouth. A strange heaviness gripped his chest, the kind that always came right before bad news. He had felt it before, months earlier, when Clara suddenly started working late, when she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets, when her tone changed, when the warmth between them grew cold. He unlocked the phone, read the message, "Going on a vacation with my ex. Don't be jealous." For a moment, the world stood still. The rain grew louder. Oliver's laughter faded. The walls seemed to press in. Ethan stared at those words, reading them over and over, hoping they'd somehow change. But they didn't. Her ex could only mean Derek Hayes, the man she'd once dated in college, the same man who'd left her heartbroken when his family had called her unworthy. Derek had resurfaced in the city not long ago, and Ethan had heard his name whispered too many times in recent weeks. But there was another layer to this betrayal. Derek wasn't single. He was married to Isabella Clark, one of the wealthiest women in the region, heiress to Clark Enterprises. Everyone knew Isabella held the true power, while Derek was just her charming shadow. Clara had just confessed she was running off with another woman's husband. Ethan placed the phone down slowly. His expression remained calm, almost unnaturally calm. He didn't yell, he didn't curse. He didn't even allow Oliver to sense the storm burning behind his eyes. Oliver tilted his head, sensing something. "Dad, you okay? You look like you forgot something." Ethan forced a small smile. "I'm fine, buddy. Just thinking." "About work again?" Oliver asked. "Yeah," Ethan said softly, ruffling his son's hair. "But don't worry. Eat your noodles. We need you strong." "Strong like Iron Man?" "Stronger," Ethan said, his voice tightening just slightly. Then with deliberate calm, he picked up his phone and typed a reply. "Enjoy your vacation. Take your time." The reply from Clara was quick. "That's it? No questions? No begging me to stay?" Ethan's lips curved upward. Not a smile of love, but of resolve. "Why would I? You're an adult. Make your choices." She paused, her typing dots blinking, disappearing, then reappearing. Finally, a reply. "I'll be gone for 2 weeks. Maybe longer," Ethan typed back without hesitation. "Take as long as you want. Oliver and I will manage." Clara put her phone down, satisfied, certain she had silenced her husband into submission. She had no idea she had just given Ethan the very rope with which to end her game. That night, once Oliver was asleep, Ethan sat in the dim kitchen, the phone glowing in his hand. "Going on a vacation with my ex. Don't be jealous." 11 words, cold, careless, cruel. And in that quiet, Ethan realized he wasn't broken. He was determined. He wouldn't rage. He wouldn't plead. He would dismantle her world with the same steady precision he used to build his own. By sunrise, he was already seated in the office of Marcus Lee, a family lawyer with a reputation for ruthless precision. Ethan slid his phone across the desk, letting Marcus read the message. Marcus raised an eyebrow. She really put this in writing? Last night, Ethan replied evenly. She told me she'd be gone at least 2 weeks, maybe more. She left Oliver behind without a second thought. Marcus leaned back, adjusting his glasses. This isn't just reckless, it's abandonment. She admitted in her own words to leaving her son for another man. Courts don't take kindly to that. We can file for emergency custody today. Do it, Ethan said flatly. By mid-morning, the petition was filed. Within hours, a judge granted an immediate hearing. At 2:00 p.m., Ethan stood in family court. Clara's message glowed on the monitor, her absence from the room speaking louder than any defense she might have offered. Judge Ramirez studied the evidence with narrowed eyes. A mother who abandons her child for 2 weeks to travel with another man has failed her parental duty. Temporary custody is granted to Mr. Morgan pending a full hearing. The gavel struck. Sharp. Final. In less than 12 hours since Clara's text, Ethan had secured custody of his son. What she thought was a taunt had become her undoing. Clara strolled off the plane, her arm linked with Derek's, her laughter mingling with the hum of the airport. She felt weightless, powerful, almost untouchable. To her, Ethan was probably sitting at home in despair, stewing in his disappointment, while she finally tasted the thrill she thought she deserved. What she didn't know was that Ethan's silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Back in the Morgan home, Oliver colored pictures at the living room table while Ethan stood by the window, watching the rain ease into a soft drizzle. He wasn't thinking of Clara, not in the way she hoped. He was thinking of Oliver, of stability, of a life no longer tainted by betrayal. That evening, after tucking Oliver into bed with a story and a promise that Dad's always here, Ethan opened his laptop. Clara's text sat at the center of his evidence file, alongside years of bank statements, credit card charges, and the quiet receipts of her double life. Each piece of paper was no longer a painful memory. It was ammunition. By the next morning, news had already begun to ripple quietly through their community. Whispers of Clara leaving her son behind for a fling with Derek Hayes spread like wildfire. And in small towns, whispers traveled fast. Meanwhile, Clara was sipping champagne at a beachfront villa, convinced she had secured the better life. Derek's charm and the illusion of wealth made her blind to the truth, that her choices were already collapsing behind her like dominoes. Ethan, with Marcus by his side, pressed forward. The custody ruling was only the first strike. Now came the financials. Marcus guided him through each step with precision, filing motions and freezing joint accounts. Clara's access to money dwindled as quickly as her reputation. Days turned into a week. Ethan never raised his voice, never called, never texted to ask where she was. His silence gnawed at Clara in ways she hadn't expected. She had left, imagining Ethan broken. Instead, she returned Derek's smirks with distracted smiles, her phone clutched in her hand, waiting for the desperate messages that never came. And then came the court notice, delivered straight to her rented villa in a crisp envelope stamped with authority. Clara's world tilted as she read the words, "Petition for full custody. Emergency hearing scheduled." Derek tried to play it off, assuring her it was nothing, that Ethan couldn't possibly win. But Clara knew better. Ethan wasn't impulsive. He was calculated. Every bit of silence had been building to this moment. By the time she boarded the plane back home, her confidence had evaporated. What was supposed to be her escape had transformed into a trap, one Ethan had laid without raising his voice, without firing a single insult. Because sometimes, the deadliest weapon isn't rage, it's silence. The moment Clara stepped off the plane, her confidence faltered. The villa's carefree laughter, Derek's whispered promises, and the intoxicating rush of rebellion all vanished under the fluorescent lights of the arrivals hall. Her phone buzzed, with notifications she had been too afraid to check during the flight. Bank alerts, account restrictions, a formal notice from the court. Her stomach twisted. She dragged her suitcase toward the exit where Derek waited, but even his presence, no, Longer steadied her. She clung to his arm, desperate for reassurance. "Relax," Derek muttered, glancing around. "Ethan's just trying to scare you. Judges don't tear children from their mothers over one mistake." But deep down, Clara knew this wasn't a bluff. Ethan wasn't the type to make empty threats. His silence had been too precise, too controlled. Every time she had expected rage, she got calm, and that calm terrified her now more than any shouting ever could. By the time she arrived at the Morgan home, her worst fears came true. Ethan wasn't waiting at the door. Oliver wasn't there to greet her with a hug. Instead, the locks had been changed, and a legal notice was taped neatly to the doorframe. Temporary custody granted to Ethan Morgan. Visitation rights suspended pending hearing. Clara's knees nearly buckled. She pounded the door with her fists, her voice cracking. "Ethan, open the door, this is my house too." But no answer came. The house, once her sanctuary, was silent. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their whispers spreading through the street. Clara, who once relished in her carefully curated image, now looked frantic, humiliated, exposed. She drove straight to Derek's apartment, her hands trembling on the wheel. When he opened the door, shirt unbuttoned, drink in hand, she finally saw him clearly. Not as the romantic savior she had imagined, but as a man who thrived on chaos, on stolen moments, on destroying stability for his own entertainment. "Don't look at me like that," Derek said sharply when she confronted him. "You knew what this was. Fun. Escape. That's it." Her chest tightened. "You said we'd start fresh. With what money, Clara? Mine or Isabella's?" His smirk deepened. "You really thought I'd give that up for you?" The words cut deeper than Ethan's silence ever had. Clara staggered back, realizing she had sacrificed her marriage, her son, and her reputation for nothing. 2 days later, Clara entered the family courtroom, her makeup carefully applied, her hair styled, her best dress pressed. She thought she could still salvage her dignity, still convince the judge she was the victim of a controlling husband. But when she stepped inside, her confidence shattered, because Ethan was already there, calm, collected. Oliver sitting beside, him with a coloring book, a quiet anchor in the storm. And on the monitor above the judge's bench, Clara's own text glowed in damning clarity. "Going on a vacation with my ex. Don't be jealous." The room fell silent as the words echoed louder than any argument she could make. Judge Ramirez leaned forward, his voice cold and clipped. "Mrs. Morgan, do you deny sending this message?" Clara's lips trembled. I was upset. It was taken out of context." "Context?" The judge interrupted. "You left your 6-year-old child to vacation with another man. That's not context, that's abandonment." Every word felt like a hammer striking the coffin of her defense. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't even look at her. He sat steady, one hand resting on Oliver's shoulder. His silence spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Clara's world, once so carefully balanced on lies and bravado, was collapsing in full view of the court. And the worst was still to come. Clara left the courtroom with her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing louder than the last. She had walked in believing she could charm her way out, that her tears and explanations would soften the judge. Instead, she had been stripped bare. Her words had sounded hollow, her excuses desperate. The echo of the gavel still rang in her ears. Custody granted to Ethan Morgan, final, unforgiving. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward her face. "Mrs. Morgan, did you really abandon your child for a vacation with another man?" She pushed through them, sunglasses hiding her trembling eyes, but nothing could block out the sting of their words. Whispers followed her, just like the ones from the neighbors days earlier. Every step she took, every glance thrown her way, reminded her of how far she had fallen. By the time she reached her car, her chest was tight, her breath ragged. She collapsed into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Tears spilled freely, streaking the makeup she had so carefully applied that morning. The image of Oliver flashed in her mind, his small frame beside Ethan in court, his tiny hand clutching a crayon. She had expected him to run to her, to cry for her, to beg for her attention. Instead, he had stayed by Ethan's side, calm and content, as if she were already a stranger. That realization broke her. Clara drove aimlessly for hours, the city blurring past her windows. She thought about Derek, the man who had promised escape and left her humiliated. She thought about Ethan, who had said almost nothing yet managed to dismantle her world piece by piece. And she thought about herself, the woman who had once dreamed of a happy family, who had traded stability for a fantasy that evaporated the moment reality pressed in. By evening, Clara ended up parked near the waterfront, the same place she and Ethan had once gone for late-night walks before marriage, before Oliver, before betrayal. She stared at the water, her reflection fractured by ripples. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. A message from Derek. "This isn't working, don't contact me again." That was the final crack. Clara's sobs broke free, raw and uncontrollable. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, the sound of her own collapse filling the car. In the space of 2 weeks, she had lost everything. Her husband, her son, her reputation, even the man she had risked it all for. And the bitter truth settled in her chest like ice. No one had taken it from her. She had handed it all away. The storm had quieted outside, but inside Clara Morgan's world, chaos had only begun to roar. She sat hunched on the edge of her hotel bed, staring at the glowing screen of her phone. The courtroom transcripts she had just been sent were like knives pressed into her chest. Ethan hadn't just filed for custody. He had already won. Her absence, her arrogance, her own words had been the nails hammered into her coffin. For years, Clara had been the one to call the shots. She had played games, tested boundaries, measured Ethan's silence as weakness. Now, that silence had morphed into something terrifying. Deliberate calculation. Viewers, imagine believing you were untouchable, only to realize the person you mocked had quietly built the guillotine you now stood beneath. Clara's hands trembled as she typed. "Clara, Ethan, please, this isn't what you think. We need to talk." The typing dots mocked her. They blinked, disappeared, returned. Then finally, "Ethan, we don't need to talk. The court has spoken." Her throat tightened. She tried again. "Clara, I didn't mean it like that. It was just a vacation." "Derek." And then a final reply. "Ethan, don't worry about Oliver. He's safe. Focus on your vacation." The words were ice. No warmth, no hesitation, just finality. The next morning, Clara forced herself to smile at Derek as they sat at a seaside cafe. He was scrolling his phone, smirking at some headline, oblivious to the implosion happening 2 feet away. "Clara, you're pale," Derek said, sipping his espresso. "Jet lag?" She forced a laugh. Something like that. But inside, she wasn't thinking about Derek's shallow grin. She was thinking about Oliver, about the way his little legs swung at the dinner table, the way his giggle filled the room. She had left him behind like baggage, and Ethan had weaponized her carelessness with surgical precision. By the 3rd day of the trip, Clara was unraveling. Derek had become distant, preoccupied with his business calls and Isabella's relentless texts demanding to know his whereabouts. He was playing a dangerous game too, and unlike Clara, he knew Isabella had the resources to destroy him if she wished. "Relax," Derek muttered when Clara snapped at him for ignoring her. "You wanted this. You said you needed escape, so enjoy it." Escape? The word tasted bitter now. She hadn't escaped anything. She had walked willingly into a trap. Meanwhile, Ethan was thriving in his silence. He didn't drink. He didn't rage. He tucked Oliver into bed with bedtime stories and made sure his son's laughter remained untouched by betrayal. But behind closed doors, he moved like a man possessed. Bank accounts, frozen, shared assets, transferred under emergency orders. Clara's name was systematically stripped from every document that mattered. Each move was cold, deliberate. Every paper filed, Every call made was another stone laid on Clara's grave of mistakes. When Marcus, his lawyer, asked if he wanted to go further, spousal support, asset seizure, full divorce filings, Ethan's answer was always the same. Everything. Take everything she thought she could use to live comfortably after this. 2 weeks later, Clara walked back into the city, dragging her suitcase like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Derek had abandoned her 3 days before the trip ended, panicking when Isabella threatened to cut him off entirely. She returned not to the family she thought she still had, but to silence. The house was stripped of her presence. Her clothes, boxed, her things stored. Even the key she carried no longer fit the lock. Panic surged through her. She pounded on the door until the neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, who had always smiled politely but never liked her, peeked out. "Ethan and Oliver don't live here anymore," Mrs. Callahan said coldly. "Maybe you should check the courthouse, or better yet, a mirror." The door slammed shut. Within days, Clara found herself seated in front of Judge Ramirez. Ethan didn't even look at her as the evidence was presented. Her messages, her abandonment, her arrogance, the judge's voice was steady, merciless. "Clara Morgan," Judge Ramirez declared, "you prioritized an affair over your parental responsibilities. You abandoned your child. Custody remains with Mr. Morgan. Furthermore, given the financial records presented, your access to marital assets is hereby frozen pending further investigation into reckless dissipation of funds," Clara gasped. "But, Your Honor," the gavel slammed. Final. Her world caved in. Clara tried everything. She called Ethan's phone until her fingers cramped. No answer. She showed up at his new residence, a condo secured under his name, alone, only to be turned away by building security with explicit instructions. "Mrs. Morgan is not permitted entry." Even Oliver was shielded from her. The one weekend visitation she was granted by the court, Ethan supervised with an unshakable calm. Clara wept as she tried to hold her son, but Oliver's small voice pierced deeper than any blade. "Daddy said you went away because you didn't want to be with us. Why, Mommy?" Her lips trembled. No answer came. It didn't stop there. Ethan's strategy was relentless. He leaked nothing to the public, but Clara's own carelessness ensured word spread. Derek, desperate to salvage his marriage, painted Clara as a manipulative distraction, throwing her under the bus in front of Isabella's circle of influence. Isabella, vindictive and powerful, made sure Clara's name became poison in the city's elite networks. Jobs she applied for vanished before interviews. Friends she once bragged to avoided her calls. Invitations stopped coming. Piece by piece, Clara was erased. 6 months after her fateful text, Clara sat alone in a dingy apartment far from the life she once flaunted. Bills piled high. Her lawyer dropped her case when she could no longer pay. Derek had long since reconciled with Isabella, who paraded him around at charity galas as though Clara had never existed. And Ethan thrived. His calm never broke. His business expanded. His reputation grew. And most importantly, Oliver grew up surrounded by stability, his father's love shielding him from the chaos Clara had created. Clara watched from the sidelines, desperate, broken, clawing at a life that had slipped through her fingers. One evening, she wrote Ethan a long message. "I was wrong. Please, for Oliver's sake, let me come back. I'll do anything, I'll change, The reply came hours later. "Ethan, you already made your choice, now live with it. That was it. Final. Brutal." Viewers, Clara thought she was in control. She thought Ethan's silence meant weakness. But silence can be the loudest weapon. In the end, Ethan never raised his voice, never lifted a hand. He didn't need to. Clara destroyed herself, and he simply guided the fall. That is the brutality of betrayal. Sometimes, the most devastating. Revenge isn't violence, but indifference sharpened into a blade. Clara had gambled everything on a text meant to taunt. Instead, it became her death sentence. And Ethan Morgan? He walked away not with rage, but with victory carved in silence.